number is slowing down, so I will get us started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live demonstration of the Salto platform. My name is Eric. I run the Sustainable Suite Script community for NetSuite developers, and I am joined today in my hosting duties by one of Salto's customer engineers, Jeff Rutledge. Jeff, how are you doing
Hello.
today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Doing just fine. I'll go through a little housekeeping here before we get started. So we have scheduled a full hour for this, but most of that we are reserving for your questions. The Q&A is open for the webinar, and I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the presentation. So if you have a question for Jeff or myself as we go along, go ahead and drop that in the Q&A tab. And the session is being recorded. It will be distributed out via email to everyone who is attending. And then afterward, it will also be posted to Salto's YouTube channel. So plenty of opportunities to review afterwards. I want to kick us off quickly by just highlighting the mission of the Salto platform. Salto is not a consulting company looking to sell you any services or anything like that. They are a software company that has built a powerful DevOps platform for business application teams to plan, review, deploy, and monitor changes to your business platforms. Salto supports systems like NetSuite, Salesforce, Zendesk, Jira, and a host of others. So at any point to try out the platform yourself, you can check out salto.io, where you can sign up for a free 30-day trial, and you can also schedule a free personalized demo. Now, we have done several of these demos this year in some of those previous sessions. Some of them have been with Jeff, some have been with other customer engineers. And in those sessions, we've shown everything from an overview of the Salto platform to how to clean up a NetSuite account, so sort of stale customizations within a NetSuite account. We've shown how to automate deployment processes, and we've shown how to monitor and set up custom alerting for significant changes in your accounts. All of that using the Salto platform. And the recordings of all of those are also available on Salto's YouTube channel if you want to get caught up. But today we want to demonstrate how Salto can be used to sort of get your bearings in a complicated or a heavily customized environment. So as NetSuite developers, administrators, consultants, certainly, we frequently inherit an existing environment. Or in the case of a consultant, maybe we're moving between very different client accounts very frequently. And we need to orient ourselves in that environment pretty rapidly. We need to build an understanding of the customizations in a certain area of that account so that we know that any further changes or fixes that we're going to make don't disrupt what's already there. And Salto has a number of useful features that help us to sort of illuminate those dark corners of our NetSuite accounts that we tend to accrue over the life of an account. So that's what we'll be focusing on today, how Salto can help us build this cohesive understanding of the customizations that are deployed in any NetSuite account. So with that, Jeff, let me stop my share and hand over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Eric. Thanks for the introduction. Let me just find the share button here. I'm wondering, Eric, and I just thought of this now. I should have done this before, but it would be useful if it's possible, you or Eric, if you're there, to create a poll and give me a sense of how many folks are brand new to Salto versus folks who have seen one of these webinars before, say, or have a little bit of knowledge about Salto. If I had that information, what I would do is I would start with an appropriate introduction, and maybe I'll do that anyways. It'd be still a useful poll to get a sense of who out there is brand new to Salto and who's had a little bit of experience. And the reason I wanted to ask that is because part of the functionality that Eric mentioned there about getting your bearings and understanding how a NetSuite platform is configured, and how to find your way through all the myriad customizations. It starts with Salto's base functionality, which is to connect to any number of NetSuite instances, and in fact, other kinds of instances as well. You can see down the left-hand side, not only am I connected to NetSuite, but I'm also connected to Salesforce and Zendesk and Workato and Zora. So we connect to these business applications and we fetch their configuration. So just configuration data. We don't deal with any kind of transactional data or anything like that, but we get a very complete picture of the configuration for, say, a NetSuite instance. So we do that through this fetch process. We connect to the APIs, we ask it lots of questions, we take all the answers to those questions, and we've processed them into this underlying language, the Salto configuration language, which is pretty easy to read, but you don't have to be able to read that to use Salto. And that's configuration language is called the NACL language. So it's the NACL is the symbol for salt. So we think that's kind of funny, and that's why it's called NACL. And we call these files NACL files, so they're .nacl files. And so NACL files is almost like Knuckles. So we named this mascot Knuckles. All of that was the lead up was to tell you why there's a beaver on my screen. His name is Knuckles. He's our mascot, and you'll see him all over the application to keep things light. And he's very helpful. So we do this. We create this map in NACL file format, and that map allows us to see the configuration in its entirety. We don't have to go through millions of workflow screens in NetSuite to understand how a workflow works. We can kind of get a handle on that within Salto, and not just workflows, of course, but all of the other kinds of elements that exist within a NetSuite configuration. So you can see that's what I've done. I've connected to my dev environment here, and I've fetched everything, and we've got all the custom records, for example, including the custom records that are the actual records themselves. We get the fields for that custom record and the custom records. This is one place to kind of understand how all the custom records are set up. Oh, thank you very much for getting that poll out there. And I am really happy to see that there are some new folks to Salto, because that's what this little rambling on is all about. That's good. So we're about 50-50-ish on new. So that's great. Love it. Thank you, whoever did that poll. That's wonderful. Very helpful. We should start that off for all of our webinars. We should start that off that way, so we can kick it off in the right direction. Cool. So now we see lots of things, custom records, and not just custom records, but also file cabinet entries and these things that we call records, or which are really just configuration elements. So all of the elements that are configured within an account, you can see here. So things like, custom lists, so all the custom lists that I have defined, currencies, employees, accounts, roles, everything that is part of a configuration within NetSuite is available to view within Salto, which is kind of cool, because now I can look at a role and I can see things like, what's this role configured like? What are the permissions defined on this role? So I get a very complete view of all the roles. And then not only that, but I can actually also compare this role to some other role and see how these things differ. So I can get a really good sense of how things are configured from a roles perspective. And then also save searches. So we actually go into the save searches. We figure out exactly how it's configured, and provide you with all of the elements that you'd see in a save search configuration screen. You can see these here as well. So we're really allowing you to see a configuration in its entirety without having to bounce around the NetSuite application, which in some cases is perfectly fine, but there are other places where it's kind of difficult to go and find out about how something is configured. So for example, if I'm looking at workflows, and I've got a workflow on my sales order that's a two-level sales order workflow, it might be kind of difficult for me to really understand all of the places where, say, a particular field is used, or some of the conditions for the transitions, and all the dependencies that are external to this picture, right? So I can see this nice picture, and I can find out a lot about this workflow by clicking through each of these pictures, each of the states and each of the transitions. But that can also be tedious if there's something like you want to know, what does where am I using a certain field? So if I go and look at that same workflow within Salto, here it is here, and I forgot to refetch, so I added the letters SO just to make it clear that this was a sales order workflow, but I haven't fetched recently. So actually, let me go and do that while we're talking. You'll see this update. So I'm just going to run a fetch. Fetch is just going to reach out to NetSuite and ask it all those same questions and download the new ones. And so eventually, when it's done, you'll see this thing update with a new name. But the point here is that this workflow, is entirely defined by Salto's underlying language, which we could go and look at if you wanted to. But this is a much easier view for the purposes of today of getting to know and getting to understand how things work. So I can see, all of the configuration stuff for this workflow, which is handy. But I can also see all of its conditions and fields and states. So I can look very detailed about all of these different states that make up this workflow. And I can open one up and say, all right, which one is this? This is okay. This is the second approval state. So that's kind of nice. So really good to be able to understand the workflow just in a different way. I mean, this diagram here is also a great way to understand how a workflow works, but it's missing a few things about, some details about dependencies. So the other thing we get out of Salto is a list of all the dependencies. Let me just close these up here so we can see them, in a smaller list here. So I've got 5 transaction body fields, a workflow action script, 6 rules, and a custom list. These are all being used by this workflow. And I'd never really know that by looking at this diagram unless I really, dug into everything that was here to find out all the different places where fields are used and things like that. So I get a very concise list of the things that this workflow depends on. Let me collapse all these guys again too. So I can see that here are the 5 transaction custom body fields that are in use by this workflow. So I can choose any one of these, and I can go and look at that definition. So this is the field. It's the workflow depends on this field. If I click on this thing, it'll bring me over to the field definition, which is cool. I can see all the things that describe this field. So that's useful. But even more useful is that I can see where else this field is used. So I can see that this field is used by 18 transaction forms. Okay, interesting. Not as interesting as the fact that it's used in 3 workflows. So I might need to be careful about modifying the elements in this selector, for example. This is a list. So if I'm modifying this, I might want to be real careful about that. So I want to know all the places. I want to look in all 3 of these workflows. So that's one thing that you can use to get a real good sense of what the impacts are going to be if you're beginning to accustom yourself to a new NetSuite environment. You can begin to understand what these impacts might be before you make changes. And then we get very detailed on where exactly is this thing used. So I want to look at this sales order. Oh, by the way, there's the SO got added in there because the fetch finished. So I can see that in this workflow, this field is used in this one place. Okay, that's great. And if I click here, it'll actually bring me back to the workflow and show me where in the workflow that's being used. And then in addition to that, there are other fields being used. This one here, for example, I'm going to go and look at and see where this one is used. So there's another field in the workflow that the workflow depends on. Let's have a look at that field definition. Here's the definition. And down at the bottom are the places where it's used. So it's used in, again, the same 18 forms and a couple of workflows. In this case, this field is actually used in 4 different places within that same workflow. So now not only can I see that this field is used by that workflow, I can go and look at all 4 places where it's being referenced. So I can get a real good sense of exactly what this field is doing, and I can bounce back and forth from the field to the workflow and just look around at all the workflow actions and the workflow states where this is being used. So I can see that this field here, the second use of this field is in this workflow action inside of this workflow state 108, which is the pending first approval state. So if I went and looked at pending first approval here, I would find that that somewhere in here it would be referenced. So again, it's like I somewhere it's in there. I'm sure I can find it if I look for it, but I can be very crisp on exactly where it's being used in this case. And I can see that it's in the, it's in the before submit event on entry. So I can really understand exactly what's going on.
Can I
Maybe I'll
jump in
stop
here
there.
real quick?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I think just to sort of step back, I know we are like scrolling through a lot and clicking through a lot of screens, and if especially if half of our audience here is new to Salto, what we're doing here, from the perspective of someone who, say, is working with this workflow for the first time. They're trying to, maybe you have a fix to make to it, maybe you have a new feature to add to it, or you're just trying to understand what does it do. In NetSuite, if you're looking at that image of the workflow, it's pretty, but it doesn't convey a ton of information. You have to click through every box, you have to click on every arrow, and sometimes multiple layers to build up this understanding of what it does. But Salto pulls all of that into one screen that we can scroll through. And it also shows us all the things that that workflow is connected to, multiple layers deep. It will show us fields, searches, scripts, all of that sort of thing. It will show us all of those dependencies so that we can start to build up this sort of contextual understanding of like, where does this workflow fit in my NetSuite ecosystem? What are the things it touches? What are the things that touch it? If I change it, what are the sort of ramifications I might want to be aware of? This sort of pulling all of that metadata into one place rather than clicking through multiple screens, multiple dialogues in NetSuite, pulling it all into one place helps you to more quickly build that contextual understanding of where this customization fits into my NetSuite ecosystem.
Yep.
Um,
Awesome.
Really
And,
quick,
and
I'll interject. I do have a
yeah,
question here
okay.
from Mario. Can I use Salto in multiple accounts? Do you have to have a separate license per account?
So it depends on what you mean by account. So NetSuite instances, the way we license is by production instance. So we kind of look at the more or less the complexity of a production instance, and we license for that. And then you can have a couple or more secondary instances that are sandboxes, for example, as part of that for no extra cost. And then if you have other like whole other NetSuite accounts, for example, if you're a consultant and you're using it in multiple different accounts, then each of those will be licensed as well. We do have some partnering programs if you're part of a consultancy that manages customers' NetSuite environments. We have a partner program too. So there's a few different ways of doing the licensing, but at its core, it's how complex is your production environment? That's your licensing cost. And then, by the way, if you have a couple of dev environments, then just don't worry about it. You can connect to those with no extra cost. Thanks for the question, Mario.
All right, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. So kind of further to your interjection there, Eric, I think that was a great segue into the next kind of feature that I'll show off, which is the AI aspects of it. So like I said before, we process everything into this underlying language. It happens to be text files, which are human readable, but also AI readable, machine readable. And that makes it very compatible with AI. So what we do is we take that NACL file and we process it through a model, and it will read the content of this workflow. It'll look at all this stuff that we see here, all the configuration, and it'll process that into a nice description of exactly what this thing does. So if there's a poorly named workflow or something that does some stuff in addition to what you're expecting it to do, and there's lots of side effects, the AI is very good at processing the content of what it does and giving a text version of that to read. So here it is. So this is it's designed for sales order records. It's a 2-level process ensuring sales orders undergo necessary reviews. Like, I didn't write this. So this is pretty great. It's a really nice way of, again, getting your bearings. Part of getting your bearings in a new NetSuite environment is to understand what a lot of these workflows do, or a saved search, for example. So saved search is another good place. Fields are interesting. They're a little less interesting than a workflow or a saved search because there's not as much to them. But getting your bearings in a from the workflow perspective, it's really great to be able to just pick any of these workflows and say, hey, Salto, can you explain what this thing does? And it will run its process and come back with an explanation.
Yeah, I think we're picking on workflows here because they are one of the more complex customization types that you have in a NetSuite account. Um, and so I think getting this sort of plain language description of what this workflow is doing, even if it doesn't give you every single nuance of the behavior, it gives you a good enough overview when you are sitting here trying to build your understanding of what this workflow is, what it does, where it fits. You get this nice plain English uh, description of what it's doing, and that gives you enough information to make the decision of, okay, good, I kind of see where it fits. Do I need to dig in deeper, or can I move on to the next sort of piece that I'm interested in? I think, and in doing that all again in one screen rather than having to click through a bunch of dialogues, take notes as you go, or hold all that information in your memory. Salto's again pulling all of that into one place for you and giving you this nice summary in one single screen.
Yeah, very cool. All right. Yeah, and a lot of these features and functions are true not only of the workflows and such, but also Suite scripts. So you can see that I've got some Suite scripts written here, right? There's a client script. And we can see that the code, which is great. We can see some of its configuration, and we saw a moment ago that we can see its deployment records as well. And then in the code itself, we can see if there's any dependencies. We would actually show you fields that uses in dependencies, and we can see that it's used by its parent script deployment record. So Suite scripts are also part of this whole framework of being able to understand what's where and how things hook together. Cool. Is there any other elements that might be interesting to show off, Eric?
Yeah.
And what else can you think of?
I'll interject actually with a question again from Mario here. Does
Bring it
the
on.
describe feature, does it do the same? Can it parse scripts? Can it parse my source files?
I believe it can, but I was just looking for that while Eric was talking a moment ago. You may have noticed that, Mario, and so that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to give an example of that, but I don't think I have a very good example of this right here. So I'll let me take that away. I actually forget if we take the AI feature is somewhat new, of course. So I forget if we actually take this script and fire it into the AI as well. It would be entirely feasible to do that. If it's not done now, that is something that is very, very easy to do because AI loves code. Like code is an easy thing for AI to interpret and give explanations for. So I would expect that if it's not here, it would be here shortly, and we could drive that description for code as well.
And as beyond the AI feature, all of the other features that we've seen where it breaks things down into fields and all of the metadata about the script, as well as all the dependencies, any fields that it references, any searches that it references, any other custom objects that the source code references will be listed here in Salto. And there's no way to do that from NetSuite. There's no way to sort of build that other than manually reading the code and pulling out all the custom IDs yourself. There's no good visualization of that dependency graph in NetSuite, but you have it right here in Salto. So it will sort of scan parse your source code looking for the custom IDs, and it will pull all those into that dependency list so that if I'm going to go change a script, or if I'm going to go maybe change a search that's referenced by a script, I know that there's a dependency there, so I can be aware of that in my changes. And again, just build that understanding of how all the customizations in your account sort of fit together.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm doing now is I'm looking for a couple things. I'm looking for a script with a dependency, and this one doesn't have a dependency. But if a script uses a field, that dependency shows up here as well. The other thing that you may have noticed I did just a moment ago is I did a search here. So searching is another great way of understanding the how a NetSuite environment holds together. So I had to search for my initials, and I usually name things with my initials, so I can find stuff pretty easily. I can find, not only can I find the elements that have the name that I'm referencing, but I can also find plain text. Like I happen to know that like underscore VAT happens. There is a VAT element here, but there's also lots of places where this VAT VAT string appears, right? So if I look, for example, in the suite scripts, there's actually a couple of scripts that use this thing, right? And so now I can actually find places where a particular variable is used. So not only can I look at the dependencies, I can also do full text searches. So it's another way of like looking carefully at exactly where particular strings of any sort are saved within suite scripts or within other kinds of elements as well. So I think that kind of brings me to the end of the demonstration content. I'd be more than happy to stick around for as long as it takes to answer all the questions that people might have.
Yeah, I got a couple more from Mario again. Questions are
All
not
right.
limited to Mario. You too can ask your questions in the Q&A
Is
tab.
it the same Mario, or do we have multiple Marios on the call?
No, I think it's the same Mario, but that's okay. Ask all the questions you want. So this one is maybe I'm going to smile because it's kind of maybe a softball, maybe the primary use case of Salto. But one of my customers is using Salto. Can it be
Okay.
used to compare sandbox and
Yeah,
production?
yeah, you bet. Absolutely. So let's see here. I'm just trying to think about an interesting comparison. Well, let's just look at the comparison and see what we find here. So the first thing I can do here is, indeed, if I'm looking at my dev environment, I want to compare that to some other environment. I go up to my compare tab here, and then I click on compare and deploy, and then I select a source and a target environment for comparisons. So I'm going to select my source environment as dev, my prod is my target. I could easily flip those around, by the way. So if I have some hot fixes in prod that I want to push back into dev, or if I want to synchronize my sandbox a little bit to my prod environment, that's something we can do as well. But if I compare dev to prod, maybe I'll give it a Jira ticket number just so later on it'll get hooked up to a Jira ticket for documentation. And I don't know, we're going to compare stuff. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do. So the first thing we're going to see is a comparison of all the things that are different about my two environments that I've selected. So there's a lot of things that are different, almost 1,000. There's, of those, there's 620 additions. So those are things that exist in the dev environment, but they don't exist at all in prod yet. So I would be adding those in. So I don't know if I look at, for example, there's 3 accounts that exist only in dev, for example. There's 204 things that are modifications. So this is the interesting one. This is kind of the one I think that Mario you're getting at, is like how do individual things differ between my source and my target environment? Let's look at workflows because we've been picking on them today. But you can see that these 5 workflows, they actually exist in both environments. And I want to know exactly what the difference is. So it's pretty easy to go in there and click on that and say, okay, what are the differences? Well, first of all, this thing has been renamed. So that's cool. It's been changed quite a lot. Actually, I think this one's not that interesting. It's based on something else that's going on. But look at this one here. Is this one interesting? Yeah. So this one, it's the same for the most part, right? But it's got this workflow custom field that's different. So there's a couple of different fields that are now being used in this one in my dev environment. Those things don't exist in my prod environment yet. So that's what's going on here, is we're seeing those differences between the two. So now, say I wanted to take those changes and actually deploy them to my target environment. We can absolutely do that too. We just select this and say, okay, I want to take this change and I want to apply that change to my target environment, to prod, because I'm ready for it to go. So I can click on the preview deploy, and it'll actually deploy it for me. And it's going to do some checks and things like that. how successful this one might be based on experience we've had with NetSuite, or based on missing dependencies, or any number of things. We kind of do some checks. It's some of the nice work that Salto, that Knuckles does for us. And then once it's finished its checks, another thing it's going to do, I think I've got this set up to do this, is it's going to create a pull request in GitHub for me. So I'm not actually going to be able to deploy this until I get an approval, right? So we can do this other thing, and it'll approve it for me. And actually, it's run into some issues and say, hey, I can't deploy this for some reason. And why is that? Well, we can have a look at it. Says can't deploy contains custom fields that are not unique within the environment. Oh, okay, interesting. So we've got to go back and do some reworking to make sure that the changes that are being requested are compatible with the target environment. So it's giving us a warning there. It says you don't deploy this yet because you'll break something, or it probably won't even deploy properly. So there's two things preventing us from deploying. One is that we've got an incompatible change, and the other one is that, hey, we don't have approval yet. So we can turn this approval process on or off. Of course, the validation steps will always be there, and prevent you from doing things that are just illegal in the NetSuite world, or could break things as well. So yes, we can absolutely compare to, and we can take those changes that are different and apply those changes to the target environment.
And
Right back. Go ahead. Sorry, please. Yeah.
yeah, that was actually a question from Victoria. Does this mean I can deploy a customization from Sandbox to production without creating a bundle or using copy to account? And yes, that is exactly what it means. This Salto is not creating any bundles. Under the hood, it's using SDF, the Suite Cloud Development Framework, which is NetSuite's official deployment tool, and some other tools to make these deployments. So no bundles, no copy to account, nothing like that. These last two have been sort of kind of the core use case of Salto, the core features, the reason for its existence. I definitely recommend you check out the Salto YouTube channel and the previous demos we've done that show this in more detail. The comparison process, the deployment process, all of those things. We have videos for you on the Salto YouTube channel. So definitely check those out. And do remember you can check out salto.io and have a free personalized demo as well.
Exactly. I thought I turned this off. So yeah, so Victoria, great question. Yes, I can deploy those, and like what I've done here is selected that sales order workflow, and it found some dependencies for me. I had to include those in my deployment as well, and I thought I turned this off, but it looks like it didn't quite take. Let me go and do that real quick. There we go. Yes, switch off. And if I go back now, I should be able to just go ahead and deploy that workflow to my target environment. And there we go. So now I can, there's a workflow here. This is that same workflow here. This is the one that's in my dev environment, right? I've selected it, and Salto forced me to find all those dependencies, and the dependencies that didn't yet exist in the target environment. You'll notice there's no roles here because those roles are already identical in my target environment. And so now if I click the deploy button, Salto will reach out to the prod environment and run that deployment for me and make sure that it'll create this thing for me in my production environment, which right now it doesn't exist. So kind of going off track a little bit, but just to fill Victoria in on the possibilities. Yes, we can absolutely take that stuff and deploy that one. It's not here yet, but in a few moments it'll show up, and we'll be able to use that workflow in production too. Cool. Any other questions in the queue?
Yes, we have a bunch of questions. I was just grabbing a link to the Salto YouTube channel. There it is in the chat. We have a whole bunch of questions now.
All right. We're gonna run the whole hour.
We saw in the deployment where we couldn't deploy because some dependency was missing, broken, etc. Again, from Mario, actually. Can you fix the dependencies from Salto, or do you have to go into NetSuite, fix them there, come back to Salto?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can actually fix some things in Salto, not everything necessarily, but all we're doing is we're taking those NACL files and we're kind of processing them back into some calls to NetSuite, so we can actually edit them on the way through. And so if we've got a we've got a deployment that's waiting to be deployed, we can not here. I have to go create a new one. Probably beyond the scope of this, but yeah, we can do some editing of these things on the way through. To say, to change the name change the name of something, or change something from active to inactive, or what have you. But typically, what happens is that someone would come back into the dev environment, make the appropriate change, and then we would fetch just those elements. So we do a change-based fetch, which says, hey, just fetch the new stuff. And so any new customizations that you wanted to change, we could fix them here and then deploy them again. So there's a kind of a range of situations there, Mario, that could happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the answer is both. You have the Nocco files that are just text files that you can read, and they are fully editable. You can change
Yep.
them directly.
Yep.
Or you can come back into NetSuite to it. I do have another question from Mario, and then I have several more too. But really quick, I want to touch on this one. Mario's asking, can I have a copy of this webinar to share with my team? I said at the top, this is being recorded, and everyone who's in attendance will get an email afterwards that you can share as you wish. And it will also be posted on the Salto YouTube channel. So once it's up there, your team and anyone else, share it with all your friends, send it to your grandma, whoever you want to share it with, it'll be up and available. And so are all of the past demos that we have done. They are all up there as well. So definitely check out the YouTube channel. I got more. You ready?
Okay. Hit me.
All right. Catherine is asking Salto. So Salto connects to a GitHub, which is connected to NetSuite rather than a direct connection. I can take this, or you can if you want.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, you take it. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so it's not, GitHub is not sitting in between Salto and NetSuite. It's more like GitHub is sitting next to NetSuite, right? They're in parallel. So under the covers, Salto is using GitHub to sort of track the history of all your elements and your changes and your deployments, so that at any point you have history. You can see, you can look at the history of the evolution of your account. You can see the changes through time, and it's storing all those in GitHub. Or it can be any other Git provider as well. You can choose which. Doesn't have to be GitHub. It can be any Git provider, even a self-hosted, if you wish. And you can connect it to. You don't have to tie it into pull requests and approvals if you don't want to. That's optional, but you can do that. You can prevent deployment until a pull request is approved, until someone else has gone in and approved, and we have a demonstration of that as well. And that will respect any of the other rules you have in GitHub for pull requests, like if you need, X number of approvers, if you need continuous integration checks to run and succeed before the pull request can be approved, excuse me. All of that stuff still applies to a Salto pull request as well. So you can tie into any sort of existing GitHub or Git, development lifecycle or thing like that you have in place already. Salto will flow and tie right into that, and its pull requests won't be treated any differently than your other ones, unless you want them to be treated differently.
And let me add to that GitHub is not a requirement for Salto either. So we can run Salto quite effectively without a separate GitHub repo. Like Eric said, behind the scenes, like this history here, you can see I can have a long history of all the things I've ever done to this environment. Every deployment I've ever done is recorded. Behind the scenes, this is actually using a GitHub repo, but you don't need to know that. The customer facing GitHub repo or Bitbucket repo or whatever your Git provider is, that's really just for the pull request approvals and for any automation you might want to add, but you don't necessarily need it. We can even do, we have this restore a previous version now that used to require a GitHub repo of yours, but we don't anymore. So you can actually go back to any previous fetch that was ever done and restore things from that fetch as well. So GitHub is not strictly required. It's useful for approvals and for some CI/CD automations. But we actually have kind of removed the requirement for using GitHub as a restore mechanism. We do that behind the scenes for you now.
Right. I've got one from Martina. Can we
Hey, Martina.
search for fields used by scripts from bundles?
Great question. Okay, it depends on the bundle. So some bundles are locked, and so we can't see the things that are in that bundle. However, if you write scripts that utilize some of those elements, you could definitely search for them. At the very least, you'll be able to search for them. If we fail to fetch them, because like I say, locked bundles are locked. We don't fetch anything that's locked. Um, in that case, the reference would only be searchable. But in the case where, let me see if I can think of one here. I believe, do I have bundles turned on? I don't have bundles turned on. We can actually fetch bundle information as well, and so we can, we can be aware of what bundles are out there. And in fact, I've turned on the bundle suite bundles script directory so that we can actually download the bundles that we that are not locked. But the shorter answer is yeah, we could probably do that. The longer answer is bundles have a range of visibility within NetSuite, and so it depends a little bit on what the bundle exposes.
If it's not locked, it's pretty much like any other element. But if it is
Mhm.
locked, there's some limitations and restrictions there.
Exactly correct.
Uh, from Jennifer, does Salto proactively notify me when a change or customization is made?
All right, I love this. Another softball. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, so we have this thing called monitoring that allows you to set up patterns that we watch for after every fetch. So every time we fetch, here's a list of all the fetches I've ever done. Every time we fetch, we kind of catalog what changed. So here's all the things that changed between the previous fetch and this fetch. I can look at it this way. It's a little easier to understand. So some transaction forms changed, workflow action script change. So between a fetch a long time ago or let's see, this is 12:38 today. So between 12:38 and 10:28, these are all the things that change in my account. So that's one thing. You can see what changed every time it fetches. But in addition to that, you can set up these monitors to watch that list of changes for specific stuff. Right. And so I've got several set up. I want to, I could do anything from archiving every single change that ever exists. So in this case, what happens is I look at every single NetSuite element, and so all of NetSuite is selected here. And anytime there's any change, I add a message to a Slack channel. So my notification Slack channel gets every single change that ever happens in my NetSuite environment. So that's one way that's maybe an audit tool. So that's kind of nice. But you can also get very specific. So here's one where I'm looking at modifications just to 5 individual things in my environment. It's going to be workflow instances. Oh no, it's actually going to be the transaction body field. So it's this workflow that workflow that we were looking at earlier. If anything changes that's part of that workflow, I'm going to get notified. And I don't have the workflow actually selected. I should probably do that. What did I call it? It was called GWR. Here it is. So I can monitor anytime that workflow changes or any of its dependencies change. So that's kind of cool. And maybe I only want this one to modify. I only want to know when it's modified. I don't care about deletions or additions, something like that. So that's another way that we can look at things. We can also look at like elements that you've tagged as important for SOX or audits. We can get emails on those. So there's 61 things in my NetSuite environment that I've tagged as being important for SOX. And every time that happens, I send an email to the SOX team, right? So yeah, we can definitely do that. Send you proactive emails or Slack messages, so that you can keep on top of changes that are happening in your production environment, particularly, but also in any environment that you solve.
Right. And that happens every time you fetch, which you said. I don't know if we've said that you can automate fetches as well to have them run every hour, every day, or every week, I believe. Do I have my schedules right?
Daily is typical. Yeah, daily, hourly, weekly. Hourly is sorry. daily is typical for NetSuite. NetSuite fetches sometimes can take 15 minutes or something like that. So sometimes we set these up daily, and we do it at midnight sort of deal. And these fetches are pretty lightweight. They really don't. I don't have any customer that said, "Hey, you guys are really impacting our performance." Lots of folks do it right in the middle of the day, and they fetch at peak hours. Not an issue. We were fairly lightweight on the APIs.
Right. Let's see. About 10 minutes or so left. We've got a couple more questions at the moment, but you still have time to get your question in. Victoria has a specific question based on a problem they had recently.
Okay.
If I have a custom list or a custom field, for instance, can I see on the dependencies the list of records that have that list or field applied to them?
I think so. Let me see if I understand. Let me go to that custom list I
Yes.
was looking at before. So here's the custom list that it's called workflow selector, I think. Yeah. So this is the custom list that I use in that workflow.
Hmm.
You've got all the information about it, including its custom values. Now, here's what one thing you might be interesting. So this is the configuration of it. At the bottom are the used by or the depends on, right? So it's used by a workflow and it's actually used by a transaction body field. So this is interesting, actually. What we'll see here is the transaction body field is just the field that uses this list. So that's a pretty easy connection, right? So I've got here's the field that uses the list. And down at the bottom here, it's going to say it depends on that list, right? So I know in both directions there's a list. It has a field that represents it, and they're codependent, right? So I can go back and forth between those two elements. Interestingly, also, we have the actual values, right? So this is green, red, blue, silver, purple. These are the values of the drop-down list, right? They each have their own ID, their own script ID, right? Sorry, this is the script ID here. Now, in addition, the workflow probably uses one of those actual vals. So if I look in here at where in the workflow this is being used, it's using a value select for this custom value. So it's funny, it used to show us the actual name here. There it is. So this is using the green, right? So I can go, like, I don't know if you saw that, but I'm going to go back to the workflow. Here's the workflow state. It's the approved state that uses this particular drop-down element. And after submit, there is a workflow action 1330 that uses the field but it uses a specific element of that field. And if I click on that, it'll bring me right back to the place where it's used and show me that this is it's the green one that's being used. Does that answer your question? I
I
hope
think
so.
it gets most of it. Can you go back to the field? Because what
Okay.
I think we'll see what they're asking there as well. What we should see on the field level is
Okay.
not only the workflow, but we should also see any forms that have that field on them.
Yes, indeed.
And so that's where you can see which record types, which forms have this field applied. And so
Yep.
that's where you can get your list. So most forms aren't going to reference the list; they're going to reference fields that source from that list. But
Mhm.
yes, you can absolutely see which forms have which fields applied to them. Or if you're looking interested in a specific field and you want to see all the forms it is applied to, you can see that from within Salto.
Yeah, so we can see that this is one particular form. It depends on 50 things. 23 of those are transaction body fields. We can see each one of the ones that this form has on it.
Great. A couple more here, just a little under 10 minutes left. From Paula, in reference to the fetch history, does it go to the user level? Uh, for
Hmm.
example, identifying who made a change.
Oh, interesting. Yes, we do get that information. Now, here's the fetch history. Let's see if it's gonna show me here. Maybe not. Maybe it's here. This might be the place. We do get that information. and it depends on how uh how verbose NetSuite is when we discover it. I'm just going to look for some that if it has this last change by unknown users. See, so in this case, we do get it, but it was actually probably an internal NetSuite process that changed this thing. If there were changes made by a particular user, I can actually filter on that. So who made the change? So maybe it's me. Let me just unhook that stuff. So here's all the ones that I made changes to. So I can see that these were last changed by me 3 months ago. So we get some of that information here. It's a really interesting thought about, how can we expose that in the Explore view. That's a cool idea. I don't think we see it in the Explore view, but we should be able to. And that's a great idea. I'll put in a feature request for that, because I like the idea about, in here we can say like who changed this last. And I don't think we expose it here very, very, very easily. So cool idea. We
I
have
think
it.
there's another.
We expose it in different places. And we also expose it in the compare and deploy. So if you look at, this deployment here, wait a minute. If I go back to, I think if I create a new one, let me go to this one here. Go to here, and I believe there's a changed by, changed at field here too. So I can see all the changes that were made by me. Here we go. So I could just create a compare and deploy, and then this will show me all the changes that were made by me.
Mhm.
So we do have a lot of that. It's just I like the idea of being able to see it in the Explorer view. I'm not sure why we haven't done that yet. It's a great idea.
Yeah, so you kind of have two separate history lists here. We have the fetch history, but that's not actually making any changes. That just shows me when did I last pull down
Yes.
when did I last sync my Salto account with my NetSuite account.
Yeah.
But the deployment history that we were just looking at, that compare and deploy list, that's where we see the actual changes that were made. And in there, we can see who made those changes.
Yeah.
You can, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the case. In this case, it's the deployers list here, and it's all me because this is my account. But customers would have all their, their admins there'd be a list of people that was deploying this. And then in this case, it shows you for the difference between the two environments. It'll show you the who changed it. So here are all mine. Right. Cool. What's
Right.
next?
A few minutes left. Just one more question at the moment from Mario again. Back to the sort of pricing licensing model. You mentioned that the price is sort of based on the complexity of the production account. The question from Mario is, how do you determine the complexity of the production account?
Great question. So on our website, if you go to salto.io/pricing, you will see a pricing calculator. You click on NetSuite here, and that'll bring up the pricing calculator. And so you would say, approximately how many saved searches you want to manage, how many file cabinet items, custom forms, workflows, and custom roles. This is it. This is what we measure, and this is really just a proxy for how complex your environment is. We measure this on a monthly basis. We kind of measure it through the month. Every time you do a fetch, we kind of look at this, and we pick a high water mark for the month, and then we bill according to that. And so at any time in the application, this pricing page allows you to estimate your initial token requirement. We kind of calculate these into what we call tokens. And then in the app itself, if you go to settings, there is a plan and usage drop down, which allows you to look. I've got a lot of environments here, so let me see if I can find one that's interesting here. Where's my NetSuite environments? I don't know. So in this case, I've got 31 forms, 22 roles. So it's telling me how many of these things I've got and how many tokens it represents. And there's a total token count here. And that total token count is the pricing is applied to that. You can think of it as about $1.25 per token per month, or $15 per year per token. That's the list price. Good place to kind of do your budget estimates.
Right. That's all the questions we have for now.
Perfect
I
timing.
think
All right.
Eric wants to
Excellent.
launch a poll here. So
Okay.
look
Okay.
out for this poll here to close out the session. But I want to thank you, Jeff, for walking us through, giving all us the
My pleasure.
demonstration here. Thanks to everybody who participated in the chat, asked questions. Appreciate all of the participation. Once again, this is being recorded. You'll get a copy in via email, and it will be posted to the Salto YouTube channel. So you'll be able to check it out there. And I think, other than the poll, I think that will bring us to a close.
Excellent. Well, Catherine, Victoria, Mario, Jennifer, thank you for all your great questions. I really appreciate them. That was a lot of fun. And I hope we get to do this again sometime.
All right. And the poll is live. All right. Good job, Jeff. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Poll has ended. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye.